頼むから外さんでくれよ。
It's not a stretch to say that Goblin Slayer is the most popular news show of the fall 2018 anime season. Its manga had a cult following before the series even aired, and ever since its first episode and beyond, it's been ranking highly in polls and dominating regional streaming charts. God knows you guys were mad about me not putting it in my fall 2018 video, so what is it about this series that's drawing so many people in? Initially, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I could have answered cynically and said that the overblown controversy and general edginess of the show is what people liked, but I didn't really care about any of that, and to me, the first episode, while mildly enjoyable, didn't do anything that stood out, and in fact was hindered by really bland direction and a mediocre production. No, I'm not just talking about CG Goblin Slayer, the action in general just felt really stiff and unexciting, which kinda sucks when the name of your show implies super awesome goblin slaying. So yeah, episode 1, not great. But, I continued on in Goblin Slayer and found something that did stand out to me. Something that made me realize the series was better than I initially thought. Something that not only enhanced my enjoyment of the following episodes, but even retroactively made me enjoy episode 1 more as well. Simply put, the best part about Goblin Slayer so far is that it is a small story. To put it into perspective, when you think of a fantasy adventure series, one of the first things that might pop into your head is Lord of the Rings. A grand and epic story about a group of hobbits who must trek over Middle-earth to throw a legendary ring into the fires of Mount Doom to save the world. Sounds pretty awesome, right? Well, Goblin Slayer is like the complete opposite of that. We're following a dude who wants to kill some goblins. That's it, and that is great. As I've made my way through the episodes released thus far, it slowly dawned on me the way that author Kumo Kagyu was zoning in on this one character and the consistent tragedy he witnesses. This is smartly founded by having the audience's POV come from the priestess traveling with him, and while I'm not sure if you're really supposed to have an emotional connection to Goblin Slayer, it does make his life and the daily escapades he goes on all the more intimate. It's because of this approach that Goblin Slayer feels like it almost has a meta understanding of the fantasy genre, and purposefully goes for a different angle. It's already humorous that the driving antagonist of our story are creatures universally known as bottom tier villains, and characters throughout remarked on how bizarre it is that the Goblin Slayer only targets these things and nothing else. It would be like playing Dragon Quest and grinding up to level 99 using only slimes. These background characters and conversations have actually done a great job at establishing the true scope of the world in contrast to the viewpoint of our main characters. Adventurers at the guild are constantly bragging about the large accomplishments they've made, such as taking down dragons or trolls, and you really do get the sense that what we're seeing from the Goblin Slayer's perspective is only a small part of something much bigger. The idea that a lot of these adventurers have the same silver rank as Goblin Slayer, but are largely disconnected from him and just do their own things, gives the universe some authenticity and makes the Slayer feel like a wanderer. The author has actually likened him to characters like Batman or the Punisher, these heroes that specialize largely in contained or minute situations, as opposed to a Superman-like character who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. This outlook is great not only for world building, but also for the narrative itself. I mentioned at the beginning how it was only the further I got when I appreciated this aspect more, and it's because it became more and more apparent that the story would almost exclusively focus on these very small situations. Things like the Goblin Slayer having to raid a cave or a fortress that's been infested. He might end up having to save some new party that got in over their head, or take a bounty to rid a farm of nuisances, but that's essentially all the stories come down down to. I also mentioned how the realization of this made me enjoy episode 1 more as well, and it's because when I look back at episode 1, despite its shortcomings, I see exactly how and why the story was set up in this way. We start with a brand new party who are overconfident and don't understand the extents of the world. They rashly try to take on what they assume will be an easy mission and wind up paying the price. Goblin Slayer of course does all that he can to help, but ultimately he's seen this same scenario so many times that he's become jaded, and is simply there above all else to wipe out every remaining goblin. By making such a small and unimportant story the focal point, this premiere episode teaches us as an audience that this world is cruel, it's unforgiving, and it's tragic even on the smallest level. Normally, a story wouldn't even bother focusing on nobodies like this party going on a hopeless mission, and the result of that is that you probably wouldn't care. But as we watch these small characters and their failures in such gratuitous detail, we have a frame of reference for the rest of the series on how awful these goblins can be and why the Goblin Slayer cares so much about killing them, which only grows and persists as we learn more about his backstory and continue seeing the atrocities that the goblins commit. I like Goblin Slayer as a character, especially in this context, for a multitude of reasons. For one, I like that he feels like an extension of the world, so to speak. Despite the series name, the Goblin Slayer never really feels like he's begging for attention or hogging the spotlight. You expect him to command presence and always be this larger-than-life personality who saves the day and kills goblins in style, and while he does have those kinds of moments, that never really feels like the essence of his character. Many side characters often comment that he's a weirdo or that he's lost his sanity a long time ago, and when you observe his interactions with others and the way he goes about his normal life, you realize they're kind of right. Goblin Slayer is a very socially awkward and incomprehensible person. The majority of his dialogue and responses consist of 1 to 2 words, and he appears to have an unwavering apathy toward pretty much everything that isn't a goblin. Being the revenge-driven sociopath that Goblin Slayer is then, it makes sense that he has become quite good at what he does. And it's just another nice detail added to the story that despite being these lowly creatures that people look down on, even goblins require skill, knowledge, and preparation to take care of. The show really goes out of its way to expand on the strategies that Goblin Slayer utilizes to not end up like the party we see in episode 1, and how deeply he's encroached his very livelihood in the pursuit of killing goblins. Things that people mock the Slayer for, such as never washing his armor or using small equipment, actually have their own purposes for goblin slaying. In general, I just love that the Goblin Slayer wasn't the kind of character I was expecting, and I love even more how he ironically feels like just another piece of this world rather than the star. And that has been made even more evident in the recent episodes as our group expands from just the Slayer and the Priestess to a full-on RPG party with a high elf archer, a dwarf shaman, and a lizard priest. In an interview, the author said that he is a huge fan of tabletop role-playing games, and that passion could not be more apparent than it is in this series. I mean, really, the characters here don't even have names. All they're referred to is by their class. It's so Dungeons and Dragons, everyone's already said it, but that's what makes it great. Forming this ragtag group of travelers only elevates the vibes I was getting before of wandering the world and encountering these small-scale stories. But it's when they're introduced that we as a viewer are also introduced to a looming plotline in the background. A plotline that almost defies everything I've praised about the down-to-earth scope of the story thus far. As it goes, the Demon King has been resurrected and is gathering forces in the capital so he can take over the entire world. And the leaders of humanity, dwarves, elves, and lizard people are holding a meeting to discuss how to handle the situation. Now, your first thought might be something like,
Boy, that escalated quickly.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
And yeah, it's sure looking a lot more like Lord of the Rings, right? But as if to shut down the potential story before it's even written, when Goblin Slayer is initially asked to join their party of representatives, he simply says, "Look for someone else. The only thing I care about is goblins." It was at this point where I was like, okay, this author knows completely what he's doing, as he made direct jabs at where a stereotypical fantasy adventure series would go. Now, of course, this plot element could be used in a more important way later down the line, but I don't have a doubt that the author will find interesting and subversive ways to work the Goblin Slayer's role around these events, because this character simply does not and will never care about anything other than goblins. Huge end of the world plotline aside, the other and more important aspect of these supporting characters being introduced is that the Slayer now has other personalities to play off of other than just the priestess. Now sure, each falls under a various archetype, but it's still entertaining and interesting seeing how someone as socially inept as the Goblin Slayer interacts with every single one of them. My favorite to watch so far is easily the High Elf Archer, not only because she's best girl, but also because her reasons for being a part of the group and becoming an adventurer in the first place are so different compared to the Goblin Slayer's. Unlike his ruthless quest for vengeance, High Elf Archer's journey is rooted from her genuine and pure desire to explore the world and see what's out there. And after her first mission working with the Slayer, helping him slaughter goblins, she comments on how this isn't what an adventure is to her, and it sparks a new goal within herself to eventually take Goblin Slayer on an actual adventure where everyone can be happy. Idealistic and naive? Sure, but it makes her that much more likable as a character. And I have to say that generally goes for everyone else in the party as well. Everyone's likable, everyone's fun, and it makes going on these small scale escapades that much more fun when you have a small yet endearing cast of characters to follow. And that's generally what I'm trying to convey with this video. Goblin Slayer has become more and more enjoyable for me with every passing episode, and it's because the author seems to have a grasp on ways to not only embrace what he loves about the dark fantasy and tabletop RPG genres, but also understands what needs to be done in order to make these situations at least slightly more interesting. The plot so far has kept a very tight focus on small stories, and I hope even if it does expand it in the future, that it doesn't lose sight of what makes these stories work. I didn't even mention some of the other things I'm enjoying from this show, like the killer soundtrack or the healthy character designs. So let me know in the comments what aspects of Goblin Slayer you're enjoying the most, and if you agree or disagree with the idea that this is a small story and that's why it works. Who knows, maybe there's some crazy manga plot events that I'm not even aware of. And if you enjoyed this discussion or anything I had to say, I would really appreciate it if you liked the video, and consider subscribing if you want to keep up with my anime content in the future. And while I do try to reply to as many comments as I can, if you want another surefire place to reach me, you can find me on my Discord or Twitter, since I'm on both pretty much all the time. Links will be in the description, and of course, as usual, have a great day.